The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of a weathered saloon, and Eleanor Walsh pressed her gloved hand against the window, her heart sinking at the sight of Timber Ridge, Colorado Territory in the autumn of 1876. Dust swirled through the single muddy street, and the handful of rough-hewn buildings looked as though a strong wind might scatter them across the mountains like tumbleweeds. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a letter promising employment as a governess to the Caldwell family, only to discover upon her arrival that Mrs. Caldwell had died of fever 3 weeks prior, and Mr. Caldwell had packed up his children and returned to St. Louis without leaving word for the governess he had hired through correspondence. Eleanor stood on the wooden boardwalk, her gray traveling dress dusty and wrinkled, her dark hair escaping its pins after days of jostling travel, and felt the weight of her circumstances settle over her like a heavy cloak. She had no money for return passage, no family to wire for help, and no prospects in a town that seemed to consist of a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and perhaps 24 rough cabins scattered along the mountainside. The stagecoach driver set her bag at her feet with a sympathetic grimace. "Sorry, miss. You might try the boarding house at the end of the street. Mrs. Henderson sometimes takes in folks down on their luck." Eleanor nodded, unable to trust her voice, and watched the stage roll away in a cloud of dust. She was 22 years old, orphaned since 17, and had spent the last 5 years working as a companion to an elderly woman in Boston who had recently passed away, leaving Eleanor with nothing but a small reference letter and the hope of this position out west. Now, even that hope had crumbled. She picked up her bag and walked toward the boarding house, aware of curious stares from rough-looking men outside the saloon. The mountains rose around the town in magnificent peaks, their slopes covered in pine and aspen trees that glowed gold in the late afternoon sun. It would have been beautiful if Eleanor had not felt so desperately alone. The boarding house was a 2-story structure that looked slightly more solid than its neighbors. Eleanor climbed the steps and knocked on the door. A stout woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression opened it. "Mrs. Henderson?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was told you might have a room. I'm afraid I find myself in difficult circumstances. I came to be a governess for the Caldwell family, but they have departed." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "I heard about that. Come in, girl. You look ready to collapse." The interior was clean and simple, with plain furniture and the smell of bread baking. Mrs. Henderson led Eleanor to a small sitting room and gestured for her to sit. "I have a room, but I cannot offer charity," Mrs. Henderson said bluntly. $2 a week, meals included. Can you pay?" Eleanor opened her reticule and counted the coins inside. "I have enough for 3 weeks. After that, I must find employment." "Employment?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "There's not much call for governesses in Timber Ridge. Most families here are miners or loggers, and their children run wild as deer. The schoolteacher position is filled. You might find work at the saloon, but I would not recommend it for a respectable woman." Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. Surely there must be something. I can read and write, I can keep accounts, I can sew and cook and clean. "Well," Mrs. Henderson studied her thoughtfully. "There is one possibility, though it is not what you are accustomed to, I'm sure. Josiah Brennan lives up in the high country, about 5 miles from town. He's a mountain man, been here since before the town was founded, makes his living trapping and hunting and guiding hunting parties. He has 2 children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 7, and he's been looking for someone to teach them their letters and help with the household. The children are half Ute on their mother's side. She died 2 years ago." Eleanor absorbed this information. He wants a governess? More like a housekeeper who can teach. It would not be an easy position. Josiah is rough around the edges, and the cabin is isolated. But he pays fair, and he is a good man despite his ways. Most women in town would not consider it, being alone up there with him and the children. Eleanor straightened her spine. She had not come 2,000 miles to be defeated by circumstance. "I am not most women. I need employment, and if Mr. Brennan needs help with his children, perhaps we can come to an arrangement. How would I contact him?" Mrs. Henderson looked surprised and a bit approving. "He comes to town every Saturday for supplies. That is tomorrow. You can speak with him then. In the meantime, you will stay here, and we will see if you have the steel for frontier life." That night, Eleanor lay in a narrow bed in a small, clean room and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier: wind in the pines, the distant howl of a wolf, the raucous laughter from the saloon down the street. She thought of her life in Boston, the ordered days and quiet gentility, and wondered how she had come to this wild place. But she had no choice except to move forward. She had learned after her parents' death that survival required resilience, and she had more of that than her delicate appearance suggested. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best dress, a dark blue wool that was serviceable and neat, and pinned her dark hair into a tidy bun. She helped Mrs. Henderson with breakfast, earning an approving nod, and then waited nervously in the sitting room. Around mid-morning, Mrs. Henderson called her to the window. "That is Josiah now." Eleanor looked out and felt her breath catch. The man riding up the street on a large bay horse was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed as broad as an axe handle and arms thick with muscle visible even through his buckskin shirt. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. He moved with the easy grace of a predator, completely at home in his body and his world. "He looks like he belongs in these mountains," Eleanor murmured. "He does," Mrs. Henderson said. "Come on, we will catch him at the general store." They walked down the street, and Eleanor tried to calm her racing heart. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She needed employment, and he needed help. It did not matter that he looked like something from a frontier legend, all raw strength and untamed masculinity. Inside the general store, Josiah was talking with the proprietor, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Eleanor's chest. Mrs. Henderson approached him directly. "Josiah Brennan, I have someone here who might solve your problem." He turned, and Eleanor found herself looking up into eyes that were a startling shade of gray-green, like the river stones she had seen in the streams around town. His gaze was direct and assessing, taking her measure in a single sweep. "Ma'am," he said, nodding to Mrs. Henderson, then to Eleanor. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling down a mountainside. "This is Miss Eleanor Walsh," Mrs. Henderson said. "She came to be governess to the Caldwell children, but you know what happened there. She is educated and capable, and she needs a position. I thought of you and your young ones." Josiah studied Eleanor for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, despite the intensity she found there. "You come from back east," he said. It was not a question. "Boston," Eleanor confirmed. "I have experience managing households and teaching children. I understand you need someone to help educate your son and daughter and assist with domestic matters." "It is not a Boston household," Josiah said bluntly. "My cabin is 5 miles up the mountain, no neighbors for miles. The work is hard, the winters are brutal, and my children are not parlor-trained youngsters. My son, Daniel, is half wild, and my daughter Sarah barely speaks. Their mother was Ute, and they have spent more time in the mountains than in any house." "I am stronger than I look," Eleanor said, lifting her chin, "and I'm not afraid of hard work. I need this position, Mr. Brennan, and I give you my word that I will do my utmost to help your children and manage your household to the best of my ability." Something flickered in his gray-green eyes, a hint of respect or perhaps curiosity. "Can you ride a horse?" "I can learn. Can you shoot?" Eleanor hesitated. "No, but I imagine I can learn that as well." "You will need to. There are bears, mountain lions, and worse up where I live." He paused, considering. "I pay $20 a month, plus room and board. You will have your own room, and I expect my children to be able to read and write and do sums by the time winter is over. You will help with cooking and mending. I will not expect you to hunt or trap, but you need to be able to handle yourself in the wilderness. Is that acceptable?" $20 a month was more than Eleanor had dared hope for. "It is acceptable. Can you start Monday?" "Yes." Josiah nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "I will come for you Monday morning, first light. Bring only what you can carry. Mrs. Henderson knows how to reach me if there is a problem." He turned back to his shopping, and Eleanor realized she had been dismissed. She walked back to the boarding house with Mrs. Henderson, her mind whirling. "You surprised him," Mrs. Henderson said with satisfaction. Most women take one look at Josiah Brennan and decide they want nothing to do with him. Too big, too rough, too wild. But I saw the way you looked at him. You are not afraid. Should I be? Eleanor asked. Afraid? No. Josiah would never harm a woman or child. He has a fierce reputation among the miners and trappers, and I would not want to cross him in a fight, but he is honorable in his way. His wife, Laughing Water, was a good woman. Her death near broke him. He has been raising those children alone, and it is not right. They need a woman's touch. Eleanor spent Sunday preparing for her new life. She washed and mended her clothes, wrote a letter to her former employer's relatives, letting them know her whereabouts, and tried to still the nervous flutter in her stomach. She was about to go live in the wilderness with a man she did not know, and children who might resent her presence, but she had no other choice, and some part of her felt a strange excitement at the prospect. Her life in Boston had been so constrained, so careful. Perhaps here in the wild mountains she might discover who she truly was. Monday morning arrived with a pink dawn and frost on the windows. Eleanor, dressed in her most practical clothing, packed her carpet bag and came downstairs to find Josiah Brennan already waiting outside with 2 horses. He had shaved, she noticed, revealing a strong jaw and a mouth that looked as though it rarely smiled. His eyes met hers as she stepped outside, and he gave a slight nod. "This is Clover," he said, indicating a calm-looking chestnut mare. "She is gentle and steady. I will teach you to ride properly later, but for now, I will lead her." He helped Eleanor mount, his hands strong and careful on her waist, lifting her into the saddle as though she weighed nothing. She felt the heat of his touch even through her layers of clothing and found her cheeks warming. This was her employer. Nothing more, she reminded herself sternly. The ride up the mountain was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. The trail wound through towering pines and across rushing streams, climbing steadily higher. Josiah moved with absolute confidence, his big body relaxed in the saddle, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Once, he held up a hand for silence, and Eleanor heard something large moving through the brush. Her heart hammered, but Josiah simply waited, and eventually an elk emerged on the trail ahead, magnificent with its rack of antlers. It stared at them for a moment, then bounded away. "Beautiful," Eleanor breathed. Josiah glanced back at her, and she thought she saw surprise in his eyes, as though he had not expected her to appreciate the wilderness. "Yes," he said simply. They reached the cabin just as the sun climbed above the eastern peaks. It was larger than Eleanor had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she could see a good-sized barn and several outbuildings. The setting was spectacular, nestled in a small valley with mountains rising on 3 sides and a view that stretched for miles. 2 children emerged from the cabin as they rode up. The boy, Daniel, was dark-haired and lean, with his father's height and his mother's golden-brown skin. He regarded Eleanor with suspicious dark eyes. The girl, Sarah, clung to her brother's hand, her face solemn and watchful. She was small for 7, with long black hair in 2 braids and eyes that seemed to see everything. Josiah dismounted and then helped Eleanor down. "Daniel, Sarah, this is Miss Walsh. She has come to teach you and help around the place. You will treat her with respect and mind what she says. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said, his tone neutral. Sarah said nothing, just stared at Eleanor with those enormous dark eyes. Eleanor knelt down to bring herself to Sarah's level, ignoring the dampness soaking into her skirt. "Hello, Sarah. Hello, Daniel. I'm very pleased to meet you. I hope we will be friends." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent. Daniel's expression softened a fraction. Josiah showed Eleanor inside. The cabin was rustic but well built, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, a stone fireplace, and several doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. It was surprisingly clean, though clearly lacking a woman's organization. Furs and hides hung on the walls, along with various tools and weapons. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, and there were shelves filled with supplies and equipment. "This will be your room," Josiah said, opening a door to reveal a small but adequate space with a bed, a chest, and a window overlooking the valley. "I'm across the hall, and the children share the room next to mine. There's a root cellar below and a smokehouse out back. We have a good spring for water. I will show you everything later. For now, settle in, and then perhaps you can make us some dinner. There is venison in the cold box and vegetables in the cellar." He left her alone, and Eleanor sat on the bed for a moment, absorbing her new surroundings. The room was clean and spare, the bed covered with what looked like a beautifully made quilt. Through the window, she could see the mountains and sky, vast and overwhelming. She felt very small and very far from everything she had known, but she also felt a strange stirring of something that might have been hope. She unpacked her few belongings, changed into a work dress, and ventured out to the main room. Josiah was nowhere to be seen, but the children sat at the table, watching her. Eleanor smiled at them and began exploring the kitchen area, finding it surprisingly well stocked. She located the vegetables in the root cellar and the venison, wrapped in cloth, in a box that was kept cold by the mountain air. As she worked, she talked to the children, keeping her voice light and friendly. "I come from Boston, which is very far from here. I have never lived in the mountains before, so I expect you will have to teach me many things. I've never seen an elk until today, and I thought it was the most magnificent creature I had ever encountered." Daniel unbent slightly. "We see elk all the time, and deer and bears and mountain lions." "My goodness," Eleanor said, cutting vegetables. "That must be exciting, and a bit frightening too, I imagine." "Pa says we have to respect them," Daniel said. "They were here first. We are guests in their home." "Your father sounds like a wise man." She prepared a simple stew, working with what she had, and was pleased when it turned out well. Josiah came in as she was setting the table, smelling of wood smoke and fresh air. He washed his hands in a basin and sat down, gesturing for the children to join him. The meal was quiet, but Eleanor could feel Josiah watching her, assessing. When he took his first bite of the stew, she saw his eyebrows rise slightly. "This is good," he said, "real good." "Thank you," Eleanor said, feeling absurdly pleased by the simple compliment. After dinner, Eleanor washed the dishes while the children did their chores, and then Josiah called everyone to the main room. "Miss Walsh will be starting lessons tomorrow. I expect you both to work hard and learn. Education is important, even out here. Maybe especially out here. Understood?" Both children nodded. Sarah, Eleanor noticed, still had not spoken a word. That night, Eleanor lay in her bed and listened to the sounds of the mountain cabin. Wind sighed through the pines. Something small and furry scurried in the walls, and she could hear the deep rumble of Josiah's voice as he said goodnight to his children. She felt a strange ache in her chest, a longing for something she could not name. This rough mountain man with his wild children had lost his wife and was doing his best to raise them alone. There was something deeply moving about his dedication to them, his fierce protectiveness. She fell asleep thinking of gray-green eyes and strong hands, and told herself firmly that such thoughts were entirely inappropriate. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Eleanor woke early and helped prepare breakfast, then spent the mornings teaching Daniel and Sarah their letters and numbers. Daniel was bright and eager once he realized she was not going to mock him for his lack of knowledge. Sarah remained silent, but Eleanor noticed that she paid intense attention to everything and could form her letters beautifully when given paper and a pencil. Afternoons were for practical work. Eleanor learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to preserve meat, to mend clothes with the heavy thread and leather needed for frontier life. Josiah taught her to ride properly, and she discovered she had a natural seat and a growing confidence in the saddle. He showed her how to load and fire the rifle he left for her protection, and though the noise frightened her at first, she practiced until she could hit a target more often than not. "You are tougher than you look," Josiah said one afternoon, after she managed to hit a mark at 50 yards. There was approval in his voice and something else, something warmer that made her pulse quicken. "I have had to be," Eleanor said, lowering the rifle. "Life has not always been kind." He looked at her with those penetrating eyes. "No," he said quietly. "I reckon it is not. But you are still standing." "As are you," Eleanor said softly. "Mrs. Henderson told me about your wife. I'm so sorry for your loss." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would walk away. But then he spoke, his voice rough with old pain. "Laughing Water was everything good in this world. She was kind and strong and saw beauty in everything. She died of a fever I could not cure, could not fight. I would have traded my life for hers without a second thought." "Your children are very lucky to have a father who loves them so much," Eleanor said. "Not all children have that." "Did you?" Josiah asked. Have that? For a time. My parents died when I was 17. A fire. I was away at school and came home to find everything gone. She had not spoken of it in years, and the words came hard. I have been alone since then, making my way as best I could. Josiah stepped closer, and Eleanor felt the heat of him, the sheer size and presence. You're not alone now, he said quietly. You're part of this place, part of us. I want you to know that. Eleanor looked up at him, her heart pounding. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than you know. He reached out as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and let his hand drop. We should get back. It will be dark soon. But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of shared loss and growing connection. As autumn deepened toward winter, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to Josiah. She watched him with his children, patient and loving despite his rough exterior. She watched him work, chopping wood with powerful, efficient strokes, his muscles flexing beneath his shirt. She watched him at dinner, his hands dwarfing the utensils, his rare smiles transforming his rugged face into something beautiful. She told herself it was foolish, that he still mourned his wife, that she was an employee and nothing more. But her heart did not listen to reason. One evening, a fierce storm blew in with little warning. Josiah had been out checking the trap lines, and as darkness fell and the wind howled around the cabin, Eleanor felt fear creeping up her spine. Daniel and Sarah were nervous too, though they tried to hide it. Your father knows these mountains better than anyone, Eleanor assured them, though she felt far from assured herself. He will be home soon. But hours passed and Josiah did not return. The children eventually fell asleep on furs by the fire, and Eleanor kept vigil, starting at every sound. She had never felt so helpless. She thought of him out there in the storm, possibly hurt or lost, and realized with sudden clarity that what she felt for him went far deeper than attraction or gratitude. Somewhere in the past weeks, she had fallen in love with this fierce, gentle mountain man. Near midnight, the door burst open, and Josiah stumbled in, covered in snow and ice. Eleanor rushed to him, her hands going to his face, his arms checking for injury. You are freezing, she said urgently. Come to the fire. What happened? Got caught in the storm, he said, his voice rough with cold. Had to wait it out in a cave. Came down as soon as I could. His eyes found hers, intense and searching. You were worried. Of course I was worried, Eleanor said, helping him out of his frozen coat. You could have died out there. I'm harder to kill than that, Josiah said, but his hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his chest. But it's good to know someone cares whether I come home. Your children care very much, Eleanor said, though her voice shook slightly. And you? Josiah asked, stepping closer. Do you care, Eleanor? It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep, rough voice sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Yes, she whispered. I care very much. He looked at her for a long moment, snow melting in his dark hair, his gray-green eyes searching her face. I swore I would never feel this way again, he said quietly. After Laughing Water died, I thought that part of me died too. But then you came here, and you made this place feel like a home again. You made me feel alive again. Eleanor's breath caught. Josiah, I'm not a man for pretty words, he said, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. I am rough and hard, and my life is not easy, but I am asking if you might consider staying, not as an employee, as something more, as my wife, if you will have me. Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. I have nothing to bring to a marriage, no dowry. What, no family, no connections? You have yourself, Josiah said fiercely, and that is everything I need. You are strong and kind and brave. You have made my children smile again. You have made me believe that life can hold joy as well as sorrow. That is worth more than any dowry. Eleanor reached up and placed her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. I thought I came here with no prospects at all, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. I thought I had lost everything and would spend my life alone, surviving but never truly living. But you have given me a prospect I never saw coming, Josiah Brennan. You have given me a home and a family and the possibility of love. So yes, I will marry you. I will stay here with you and your children and build a life in these mountains." Josiah pulled her into his arms, and she felt the strength of him surrounding her, warming her, sheltering her. "Eleanor," he murmured against her hair. "My Eleanor." He tilted her face up and kissed her, and Eleanor felt as though she had come home after a long, cold journey. His lips were firm and warm, the kiss both tender and passionate, conveying everything he found difficult to say in words. She kissed him back with all the love and longing she had been holding inside, and felt his arms tighten around her. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Josiah rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he said. "I will take you to town this weekend and speak to the preacher. We will be married proper, before God and everyone." "I would like that," Eleanor said, smiling through her tears. A small sound made them both turn. Sarah stood in the doorway to the children's room, her eyes wide. Eleanor tensed, worried about how the child would react, but then Sarah ran forward and threw her arms around Eleanor's waist. "Mama," Sarah whispered. It was the first word Eleanor had heard her speak, and it shattered something inside her chest and rebuilt it stronger. Eleanor knelt and pulled Sarah close, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, sweetheart. Yes. I will be your mama if you will let me." Daniel appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. When he saw his father and Eleanor together, saw his sister clinging to her, understanding dawned on his face. "Are you going to marry Miss Walsh, Pa?" "I am," Josiah said, "if you and your sister are all right with that." Daniel considered this seriously, then nodded. "She is good. She's kind to us and she makes you smile. I think Mama would have liked her." Josiah's eyes glistened with moisture. "I think she would have too, son. I think she would have too." The wedding took place the following Saturday at the small church in Timber Ridge. Mrs. Henderson stood up with Eleanor, and the local doctor stood up with Josiah. Daniel and Sarah attended, both scrubbed clean and wearing their best clothes, pride and happiness shining in their faces. Eleanor wore the only good dress she owned, but Mrs. Henderson had helped her add some lace trim, and she had wildflowers in her hair that Sarah had gathered. Josiah wore clean buckskins and had trimmed his hair and beard. When he looked at her as she walked down the short aisle, the expression in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. They spoke their vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor and cherish until death parted them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Josiah kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the small congregation sighed audibly. Afterward, there was a small celebration at the boarding house with cake and cider and well wishes from the townspeople. Many of them had been skeptical when Eleanor first arrived, but seeing her with Josiah and the children, seeing the obvious love between them, their doubts melted away. "You have done well, girl," Mrs. Henderson said, hugging Eleanor tightly. "I knew you had steel in you." "Thank you for believing in me," Eleanor said, "for giving me a chance when I had nowhere else to turn." That night, they rode back up to the cabin, now her home in truth. Josiah had sent the children ahead with a friend who would stay with them overnight, giving the newlyweds privacy. As they rode through the moonlit forest, Eleanor felt a contentment she had never known. At the cabin, Josiah helped her down from her horse and carried her over the threshold, a tradition he insisted on observing. He set her down gently in their home, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. "I never thought I would feel this way again," Josiah said quietly. "I thought my heart was buried with laughing water. But it was not dead, just sleeping, waiting for you to wake it up." "I was so lost when I came here," Eleanor said, stepping close to him. "I had no prospects, no future I could see. I thought I would spend my life alone, working for others, never having a home or family of my own. But you saw me, Josiah. You saw past the frightened woman on the boardwalk to who I really was. You gave me a prospect I never imagined, a life beyond anything I dared dream." "You gave me the same," Josiah said, pulling her into his arms. "You brought light back into this cabin, into our lives. You gave my children hope and laughter. You gave me a reason to believe in tomorrow." He kissed her then, and the kiss deepened into passion. Eleanor had never been with a man before, and she felt nervous anticipation warring with desire. But Josiah was patient and gentle, leading her through each step, his touches both reverent and hungry. He carried her to their bedroom, and there in the darkness, with moonlight streaming through the window and the wind singing in the pines outside, they came together as husband and wife. Afterward, Eleanor lay in Josiah's arms, her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heartbeat. His hand stroked her hair, gentle and soothing. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I did not know I could feel this much." "I love you too," Josiah said, his deep voice rumbling through her. "You are my heart, Eleanor, my second chance, my gift from God." She tilted her face up and kissed him, and felt him smile against her lips. They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and responses, building pleasure until it crested and broke over them like a wave. As Eleanor drifted toward sleep, safe and warm in her husband's arms, she thought about how far she had traveled, both in miles and in spirit. She had come west as a desperate woman with no prospects, no hope, no future. But the mountain man who had taken her in had given her everything she never knew she needed. He had given her love and family and a home in the wilderness. He had given her herself. The winter came on hard and fast, with snow piling deep around the cabin and temperatures that plunged far below zero. But inside, there was warmth and love and growing happiness. Eleanor had never been so busy or so fulfilled. She taught the children every morning, watching with pride as they progressed rapidly in their reading and writing. Daniel proved to have a gift for mathematics, while Sarah showed artistic talent, drawing beautiful pictures of the animals and mountains around them. Eleanor also learned the skills she needed for frontier life. Josiah taught her to snowshoe and to recognize the signs of dangerous weather. She learned to make soap and candles, to cure hides, to cook over an open fire. Her hands, once soft and pale, became roughened and capable. Her body, once delicate from indoor living, grew strong from the constant physical work. But it was not all work. There were moments of joy and laughter. Snowball fights in the meadow near the cabin, with Josiah's deep laugh echoing off the mountains. Evenings by the fire, with Eleanor reading aloud while Josiah carved and the children drew or played quiet games. Nights in Josiah's arms, learning the language of love and passion, feeling cherished and desired in equal measure. One evening in late January, as a blizzard howled outside, the family sat together by the fire. Sarah was curled against Eleanor's side, and Daniel sat at Josiah's feet, all of them warm and content. "Tell us about Mama," Sarah said quietly. "Our first Mama." Eleanor tensed, worried this might be painful for Josiah, but he smiled gently. "Your Mama was beautiful and brave. She taught me to respect the land and the creatures on it. She could track a deer through the forest and find plants for medicine and healing. She loved you both more than life itself." "Do you think she would mind that we have Eleanor now?" Daniel asked, his young face serious. Josiah looked at Eleanor, his eyes warm with love. "I think your Mama would be happy that you have someone to care for you and love you. She would want you to be happy, and Eleanor makes us all happy." "I hope I do," Eleanor said softly. "I love you both very much. I cannot replace your mother, and I would never try. But I can love you and care for you, and be here for whatever you need." Sarah snuggled closer. "You are our Mama now. We love you." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, and Josiah reached over to squeeze her hand. These moments, she thought, were what life was truly about, not grand gestures or dramatic events, but these quiet instances of love and connection. As winter gradually released its grip and spring came to the mountains, Eleanor discovered she was with child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Josiah. When she finally shared the news, she watched his face carefully, unsure how he would react. For a moment, Josiah simply stared at her. Then a smile spread across his rugged face, transforming it with joy. He let out a whoop that startled the children and swept Eleanor into his arms, spinning her around. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." Daniel and Sarah crowded around, excited and asking 100 questions. Eleanor answered them as best she could, her heart full to overflowing. She had gone from having no family at all to having this, a husband who loved her, children who needed her, and a baby growing inside her. It seemed almost too much happiness to contain. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Eleanor was often tired and sometimes sick in the mornings. Josiah was fiercely protective, insisting she rest more and let him take over the heavier chores. The children were equally solicitous, bringing her wildflowers and trying to be extra quiet when she needed to nap. As her belly grew round, Eleanor felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. She and Josiah would lie in bed at night, his large hand splayed over her stomach, feeling the baby move and kick. "Boy or girl?" Josiah would ask, his voice tender. "I do not care, as long as the baby is healthy," Eleanor would always reply. "Though I confess, I would love a little boy who looks like you." "A girl," Josiah would counter, "with your beauty and spirit." In late September, as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Eleanor went into labor. Josiah rode to town to fetch the midwife, while Mrs. Henderson, who had come up to stay for the last few weeks of the pregnancy, helped Eleanor through the early contractions. Daniel and Sarah waited anxiously in their room, trying to be brave. The labor was long and difficult. Eleanor had never experienced such pain, and there were moments when she wondered if she would survive it. But Mrs. Henderson and the midwife were experienced, and Josiah held her hand through the worst of it, his strength and presence anchoring her. Finally, as dawn light began to filter through the window, Eleanor gave a final desperate push, and the baby slid into the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," the midwife announced, cleaning the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as the midwife placed the baby in her arms. He was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look at her with ancient wisdom. Josiah knelt beside the bed, his rugged face wet with tears. "He is beautiful," he said hoarsely. "You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered. "Look what we made, Josiah. Look at our son." They named him Thomas, after Eleanor's father. Daniel and Sarah were allowed in to meet their new brother, and both were awed and gentle, touching his tiny hands with wondering fingers. "He is so small," Daniel said. "Was I ever that small?" "You were," Josiah assured him, "and Sarah was even smaller." "I will protect him," Daniel declared solemnly. "I am his big brother." "And I will help take care of him," Sarah added, her dark eyes shining. Eleanor looked around at her family, at the children she had come to love as her own and the baby she had birthed, at the man who had given her everything she never knew she needed, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost a prayer. A year ago she had been alone and desperate, stepping off a stagecoach with no prospects and no hope. Now she had this, a family and a home and a love that would sustain her through whatever life might bring. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were filled with love and purpose. Thomas grew into a sturdy, cheerful child who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of the mountains. Daniel became a skilled hunter and tracker, tall and strong like Josiah. Sarah's artistic talents blossomed, and her drawings of frontier life became treasured possessions. She also found her voice fully, becoming a bright, talkative child who brought laughter to the cabin. 3 years after Thomas was born, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had Eleanor's dark hair and Josiah's gray-green eyes, and she was as fierce and determined as the flower she was named for. 2 years later, another son arrived, named William, who was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit and observe the world around him. Eleanor sometimes stood on the porch of the cabin, watching her children play in the meadow while Josiah worked nearby, and marveled at the life she had built. She had learned to love the mountains, to respect their beauty and danger. She had learned that she was far stronger than she had ever imagined, capable of surviving harsh winters and difficult childbirths and the 100 daily challenges of frontier life. But more than that, she had learned that home was not a place but the people you loved. She had learned that prospects could appear when you least expected them, that love could bloom in the wilderness, that a desperate woman with nothing could find everything. When Daniel turned 18, he announced that he wanted to become a scout and guide like his father. Josiah was proud and set about teaching him everything he knew. Sarah, at 15, had been offered a position illustrating books for a publisher in Denver who had seen her work. It was a difficult decision, but ultimately, she decided to go with the understanding that the mountains would always be her home and she would return often. Thomas, William, and Rose continued their education with Eleanor, all three bright and eager to learn. The cabin was always full of noise and life and love. One evening, when Eleanor was 40 years old and had been married to Josiah for 18 years, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The children were all occupied inside, giving them a rare moment of quiet. "Do you ever regret it?" Josiah asked, taking her hand in his. "Staying here instead of going back east? You could have had a more comfortable life, more society, more culture." Eleanor turned to look at her husband. He was graying now at the temples, and lines of age and weather marked his face, but he was still the strong, protective man she had fallen in love with. If anything, she loved him more now than she had then. The love deepened and enriched by years of shared experiences and mutual support. "Never," she said firmly. "This is where I belong, Josiah, with you and our children in these mountains. You gave me a prospect when I had none, a life when I thought mine was over. You gave me love and purpose and a family. How could I ever regret that?" Josiah raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You saved me too," he said quietly. "I was just existing after Laughing Water died, going through the motions, but not really living. You brought me back to life. You filled this cabin and my heart with light and love. You gave me more children to raise and love. You gave me hope." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the gathering dusk. She thought about the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach all those years ago, desperate and alone. She thought about the risks she had taken, the strength she had found, the love she had discovered. "I came west as a governess with no prospects at all," she said softly. "But the mountain man gave me a prospect I never saw coming. He gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Josiah corrected, his arm coming around her shoulders. "That is what love does. It multiplies, it grows, it transforms. You transformed me, Eleanor. You transformed all of us." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky and the first cool breath of evening wind sighed through the pines, Eleanor felt complete peace. Her journey from Boston to these mountains had been long and difficult, but every step had brought her to this moment, to this place, to this man and this family. She had learned that prospects could appear in the most unexpected places, that love could bloom in the wilderness, that strength came not from avoiding hardship, but from facing it with courage and hope. She had learned that home was wherever your heart was anchored, and hers was anchored here, in these mountains, with this man and these children. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost friends to accidents and illness. They celebrated weddings and births. Daniel married a woman from town and brought Josiah's first grandchild into the world, a boy with dark hair and laughing eyes. Sarah returned from Denver with a portfolio full of published work and tales of the city, but she always came home to the mountains in the end. Thomas grew into a man much like his father, strong and quiet and deeply connected to the land. William surprised everyone by showing a gift for healing and went to study medicine in Denver, but he too returned to practice in the mountain communities where doctors were scarce and desperately needed. Rose was the fiercest of all the children, learning to ride and shoot and track as well as any of her brothers, and she eventually became a guide and outfitter herself, one of the few women in that profession. Josiah and Eleanor grew older together, their hair turning silver, their bodies showing the marks of hard years and honest work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming a foundation so solid that nothing could shake it. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. The place was full of noise and laughter, with children running everywhere and food covering every surface. Eleanor stood in the midst of it all and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Josiah found her there and pulled her into his arms, uncaring of who might see. 25 years, he murmured. Best years of my life. Mine too, Eleanor said, smiling up at him. Every single one of them. He kissed her, a kiss that held 25 years of love and passion and partnership, and their children cheered and their grandchildren giggled, and Eleanor felt her heart would burst with happiness. That night, after everyone had gone to bed or headed back to their own homes, Josiah and Eleanor sat on their porch as they had so many nights before. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging, and the stars wheeled overhead in familiar patterns. "Do you remember the first time I brought you up here?" Josiah asked. "You were so nervous sitting on that horse like you might fall off at any moment." Eleanor laughed. "I was terrified. Of you, of the mountains, of everything. I thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life. And now? Now I know it was the best decision I ever made, saying yes to this life, to you, to all of it." She paused, then added softly, "I love you, Josiah Brennan. I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Josiah said, his voice rough with emotion. "My Eleanor, my wife, my partner, my heart." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands, listening to the night sounds of the mountains, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family and a legacy of love, a governess with no prospects and a mountain man who had given her everything. As the years continued to roll by, Josiah and Eleanor remained active and involved in their children's and grandchildren's lives. The cabin that had once housed just Josiah and his two children became a gathering place, a touchstone for the growing family. During holidays, it overflowed with people, and Eleanor loved every chaotic moment. She and Josiah took long walks through the mountains when weather permitted, moving more slowly now, but still reveling in the beauty around them. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence that came with decades of companionship. Sometimes they spoke of the past, remembering Laughing Water with love and gratitude for the children she had given Josiah, for the lessons she had taught him about living in harmony with the land. "She would have liked you," Josiah said one afternoon as they rested beside a stream. "Laughing Water had a gift for seeing people's hearts. She would have seen yours and known you were good." "I hope so," Eleanor said. "I've tried to honor her memory by loving her children and teaching them about both their heritages. I wanted them to know they came from two worlds, and that both were valuable." "You did that," Josiah assured her. "Daniel and Sarah are proud of who they are, of both sides of their family. You gave them that." When Eleanor was 55 and Josiah 62, he began having trouble with his breathing, especially after exertion. Eleanor worried, but Josiah dismissed it as simply getting older. William, now a skilled doctor, came to examine his father and looked grave. "His heart is weakening," William told Eleanor privately. "He needs to slow down, rest more. The altitude is hard on him." Eleanor confronted Josiah that evening. "William says you need to take things easier." Josiah scowled. "I am fine." "You're not fine," Eleanor said firmly. "And I did not come all this way and love you all these years only to lose you because you are too stubborn to listen to your own son, who happens to be a doctor." Josiah looked at her, and his expression softened. "I do not want to be weak." "Resting is not weakness," Eleanor said, taking his hands. "You have been strong for everyone your whole life. Let us be strong for you now. Let your family help you." He pulled her close, and she felt him trembling slightly. "I'm afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid of leaving you, of not being here to protect you and provide for you." "Oh, my love," Eleanor said, tears in her eyes. "You have provided for me beyond measure. You have given me a lifetime of love and happiness, and you are not leaving me yet. We have years still ahead of us, but you have to take care of yourself." Josiah agreed to slow down, and though it chafed at him, he let Thomas and Daniel take over more of the physical work. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them what he knew, passing on the skills and wisdom he had accumulated over a lifetime in the mountains. Eleanor watched him with those little ones and fell in love with him all over again. He was so gentle with them, so patient, his big, weathered hands guiding their small ones as he taught them to whittle or track or identify plants. They had 3 more good years, years filled with love and family and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Then, one morning in early spring, Josiah did not wake up. He had died in his sleep peacefully, with Eleanor beside him as she had been for nearly 30 years. Eleanor's grief was profound, but it was not the despairing grief of her youth when she had lost her parents. This was the sorrow of losing a partner, a friend, a lover, the other half of her soul. But woven through the grief was gratitude for the years they had shared, for the love they had built, for the family they had created together. The funeral was held in Timber Ridge, and it seemed like the entire territory came to pay respects. Josiah had been a legend in the mountains, respected by trappers and miners and native peoples alike. But it was the words of his children and grandchildren that told the true story of the man he had been. Daniel spoke of his father's strength and honor, of how he had taught him to respect all living things. Sarah spoke of his gentleness and his ability to see beauty in unexpected places. Thomas, William, and Rose spoke of growing up with a father who was both fierce protector and tender caregiver, who had loved their mother with a devotion that had shown them what marriage should be. Eleanor stood before the gathered crowd and spoke from her heart. Josiah Brennan gave me everything. I came to these mountains with no prospects, no hope, no future I could see. I was a woman alone, desperate and afraid. But Josiah saw past that. He saw the person I could become if given the chance. He offered me a prospect I never imagined, and that prospect became my whole life. He gave me love and family and a home. He gave me purpose and strength and joy. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we had together. He was my heart, and though he is gone, his love remains with me and with all of us. After the funeral, Eleanor returned to the cabin. Her children wanted her to come stay with one of them, but she refused. "This is my home," she said simply. "This is where I belong." She was not alone for long. Rose came to stay with her, bringing her own young children. Then Daniel's family moved into a cabin just down the valley. The family circled around her, offering love and support, and Eleanor accepted it gratefully. She lived another 15 years, long enough to see all of her grandchildren grown and to meet several great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and active, teaching reading and writing to any child who came to her, helping with births and illnesses, serving as the matriarch of the growing family. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and look at the mountains, remembering. She remembered the frightened girl who had stepped off the stagecoach. She remembered the first time she saw Josiah, so big and rough and intimidating. She remembered the moment she realized she loved him, the joy of their wedding day, the births of their children, the 1,000 small moments that had made up their life together. She never remarried. How could she, when her heart still belonged to Josiah? But she did not live in sadness. She had too much joy around her, too many blessings to count. When Eleanor was 73 years old, she became ill with pneumonia. William came to care for her, but they both knew this was her time. She was not afraid. She had lived a full life, had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. Her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed, and she looked at each of them with pride and love. "I am so proud of all of you," she said, her voice weak but clear. "You have built good lives, raised good families. You honor both me and your father with who you are." "We love you, Mama," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "And I love you," Eleanor said, "all of you. You have been my greatest joy." As night fell and her breathing grew labored, Eleanor closed her eyes and saw Josiah waiting for her. He looked young and strong, the way he had when they first met, and he was smiling, his hand extended toward her. "I've been waiting for you," he said. "I've missed you every moment." "And I've missed you," Eleanor said, taking his hand. "But I had to stay, had to see our children grown and settled, had to make sure they would be all right." "They are more than all right," Josiah said, pulling her close. "You did that. You built something beautiful from the prospect I gave you." "We built it together," Eleanor corrected. "Everything we had, we built together." In the cabin, surrounded by her family, Eleanor took her last breath with a smile on her face. Those watching said she looked peaceful, happy, as though she were going to meet someone she loved. They buried her next to Josiah on a hillside overlooking the valley with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The headstone read, "Eleanor Brennan, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She came with no prospects and found everything." Years later, when her great-great-grandchildren asked about the woman whose name they carried, whose story had become family legend, they were told about the governess who came west with nothing and the mountain man who gave her a prospect she never saw. They were told about love that transcended loss, about strength forged in hardship, about family built on foundation of mutual respect and devotion. They were told that Eleanor and Josiah had created something that lasted far beyond their own lives, a legacy of love and courage that continued through generations, that the desperate woman and the grieving widower had found each other and built something beautiful, something eternal. And on quiet evenings, when the wind sighed through the pines and the mountains turned purple in the twilight, those who lived in the valley swore they could sometimes see two figures walking hand in hand through the forest, a big man with long hair and a slender woman with her head on his shoulder, together for all eternity in the place they had made their home. The cabin still stood, maintained by the family, a testament to the life that had been lived there. Visitors came to see it, to hear the story of Eleanor and Josiah, to understand how love could bloom in unexpected places, how prospects could appear when all seemed lost. Children learned to read at the same table where Eleanor had taught her own children. Couples spoke their wedding vows on the porch where Eleanor and Josiah had sat through countless evenings. New babies were brought to the cabin to be blessed, continuing a tradition that Eleanor herself had started. The mountains remained, eternal and unchanging, witness to all the small human dramas that played out in their shadow. They had seen Eleanor arrive, frightened and alone. They had watched as she grew strong and confident. They had sheltered her family and kept them safe. And they would continue to stand long after everyone who remembered Eleanor and Josiah was gone, silent guardians of a love story that had become legend. But for those who had known them, for the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their lessons, Eleanor and Josiah were not legend, but real people who had loved deeply and built well. They were reminders that life could change in an instant, that prospects could appear from nowhere, that love could transform everything. Eleanor had come west as a governess with no prospects at all. Josiah had been a grieving widower trying to raise his children alone. Together, they had built a life that touched generations, a love that became the foundation for an entire family line. They had proven that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, that opening your heart to possibility can lead to miracles, that true love can indeed conquer all. And so the story ended where it began, in the mountains of Colorado Territory, in a cabin filled with love and memory, with a legacy that would endure as long as the peaks themselves stood watch over the valley. Eleanor and Josiah had found each other across a gulf of loss and desperation, and in finding each other, they had found home, family, and a love that truly lasted forever. Their story was passed down through the years, told and retold, each generation adding their own memories and perspectives. But the core remained the same. A woman with nothing had found everything. A man who thought his heart was dead had found it could live again, and together they had created something that would outlast them both. In the end, that was the prospect Josiah had given Eleanor, and the one she had given him in return, not just a life or a family or a home, but the knowledge that love could heal, that hope could triumph over despair, that two broken people could become whole together. It was a prospect worth far more than any dowry or inheritance, worth more than gold or land or anything the world might offer. It was the prospect of true love, freely given and fully received, and it was the greatest gift either of them had ever known.